Okay, it says we are live. Hi to anybody who's watching. I know some people will show up early. So this is Michael Dillon. Do you go by Michael or Michael Dillon, by the way?
Yeah, Michael's good. Yeah.
Okay, I have referred you as Michael Dillon in my head, but it just occurred to me that maybe you just go by Michael.
Yeah, that's
Anyways, this
funny.
is Michael. He's
I've
in
had
the
friends who
he's in
do
the
that actually.
UK. Do you live in England or do you live in Ireland?
I live in England at the minute.
Okay, so he's in England. What time is it for you?
It's 5:30 in the evening.
Okay, and it's 12:30 p.m. here, my time. I'm on my treadmill for this one, walking instead of drinking tea or coffee. And we're here to just kind of chat about how we got into data, what it looks like now that we're in data, and kind of topics in the space because we're also both content creators. So we get a lot of questions, and so we talk about data topics a lot. I'm really interested to hear from him about networking, but kind of gonna work our way there. So thanks for coming on with us today.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. I think we've had like chats before, and I remember like the whole time it being like really interesting. And every like 15 minutes, we were like, "This should be a podcast. Like, we should really be sharing this." And then now it actually is. So that's cool.
Yeah, I never thought that at that time, I never thought that I would be last time I talked to you like over Zoom or whatever, it was before I got a job. And you actually had said something to me and you'd been like, just do whatever you need to do to get the experience that you can show to get you into the industry, whether that's consulting, whether it's not as well of a paid job or whatever. And that is what had inspired me to take on this like free project that I did that was kind of like consulting. And I talked about that extensively in my final round interviews, and it's part of what got me my job. So just wanted to let you know that little nugget. Thanks for that.
There you go. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. I remember that time you were like super busy because you had so much going on. But I was like, once you get the job, you're gonna be able to just relax and enjoy it. So yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, you were right. So tell us a little bit about your background. I know you've told me a little bit, but what were you doing before you got into data?
Yeah, so I think my whole story is kind of funny, really. I did like a economics degree in Edinburgh in Scotland, and while I was there, I was enjoying economics, but I basically started playing online poker. So that was just something I found really interesting. I really enjoyed like the analysis and trying to like think about strategy and really just like the decision making of it. And it was a game that I was playing with my friends at university, and then I started playing online. And I basically I like finished university and had like didn't really know what I wanted to do next. I knew that I enjoyed strategy. I knew I enjoyed poker, and for the next couple of years, I actually just played poker, and that was yeah, it was like really fun. It was like a kind of like a project where I was kind of like my own boss for a while, and kind of felt a little bit like I was just doing my own business or something because I was kind of just setting my own schedule, and I was like constantly trying to think about how do I get better at this game. But it was also like super stressful way to live because like you can make money, but then you can also lose money. So most people who put a lot of time into things, like if they put a lot of time into their job, they're guaranteed to make a monthly salary. And if they just work, they'll just get paid. Whereas I was like kind of like if I work, I might get paid, but I might not get paid. Might be the opposite. So like that was really fun though. And there's loads of analysis, there's loads of strategy, and eventually I kind of realized that I just wanted to get a job where I was like working around people, working with people, and ideally just keeping thinking about strategy and thinking about decision making and stuff like that. So I got a job at a trading company. So that was in Ireland, and it was basically I was in a team where I just managed like a portfolio, like an energy portfolio. So like the company owned lots of the Irish electricity plants, and they generate electricity, and they would need like gas and stuff like that. So you buy all the stuff to generate the electricity. So I basically just took the stuff I learned from poker and just put it into trading. And then for the next like 5 or 6 years, I just did trading. And then after that, I was like, I think everything that's like strategy focused is now moving into the data world. And that was kind of when I was like, if I actually want to keep an interest in strategy, I want to keep an interest in anything commercial, it just has to all be about data, because that's all anyone uses now to make decisions. And then that was kind of how I started to look for data jobs.
Wow, that's a really interesting twist. You know, I feel like the type of like content that you post is actually really reflective of that history, because you think a lot about like strategy. Like you're talking about networking not from a perspective of like, I want to be everyone's friend, but like it's very strategy based. So that like poker and trading history, I feel like leads itself really well. I was talking to someone recently about how I think that if you're good at board games and you win board games every time you play like strategy board games, that's a clue you might be like good at data analytics.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like being good at poker is maybe another clue in maybe a separate category that you might be good at data analytics. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I would agree for sure. I think essentially whenever I was playing poker, like it was a game, but I enjoyed playing the game and I enjoyed talking about the game to other people. And one of the great things about the poker community is that people just talk strategy about poker all the time. So they're constantly saying, if you were in this situation, what would you do? If you were in that situation, what would you do? And I think I just took that sort of state of mind of like trying to like gamify things and think strategically. And just whenever I started looking for a job, I just kind of kept the same approach. Like people call it networking, but all I was doing was really just reaching out to people who were my friends and saying, if you were in this situation, what would you do? And it was just a very similar approach. So I think like you're totally right. Like I think this thing I find interesting is the strategic side of it. And then with data, it's exactly the same. It's like, why is this happening? And it's all just puzzle solving, and it's kind of essentially the same thing.
Yeah. So when you decided to go about learning data, did you decide immediately on like, okay, data analytics, or like was it just kind of like data question mark?
Yeah, like I think I was already doing lots of analysis in my job, and it was like a really commercial job. But whenever I kind of looked to work somewhere else, I just realized that every job description just had all these words I'd never heard of before. So it was all like SQL and Python. And I was just like, I don't even know what any of that stuff is. So that was kind of like the first time I was like very much thinking about like how to actually get a job in data. And I basically started doing the certificates, like the courses that people do, just to get started. But I just really had no focus. Like I had no direction. So I was just kind of like reaching out to people in the data community and just asking them questions all the time. And yeah, that was kind of, I was basically asking them like, what do you do in your job? Um, like, do you find it interesting? And how did you get your job? And then I was trying to like work back to think, would I find that interesting? Do I actually want that job? And then if I do, like, try to essentially just copy what they did. And if you do that enough times, you kind of you eventually figure it out.
Yeah, that is a very definitely strategic way to do it. So, were there any courses that really stuck out to you as really great, or was there anything you did that you think was really not a good use of your time?
Yeah, for sure. Like I think that I know we've talked about this before, but like everybody learns in a completely different way. So I think it's really important to just understand how you actually learn yourself. And to me, if it's um, like a video where you just watch for like an hour and you don't do anything, I just like really, really struggled to get through it. Like I need to watch it on a faster speed, or like I need to take loads of breaks because I just need to be doing stuff. So I really like the data camp courses because whenever you get asked a question, you get to do some coding, and whenever you get an assignment, you get to essentially just do it, and then once you've done it, you get feedback, and then you get to do another one. So I kind of like any course that just has like that you're kind of like working the whole time. I find that way more interesting than any course where you just watch the whole time.
Yeah, and so you said you data camp courses were good for that?
Yeah, they're really good. It just has like a coding screen, and then it shows you
Hmm.
videos. And then once you watch a video, you just do some coding, and you're just kind of going 5 minutes of video, 5 minutes of coding just all the time. And it's like you're learning how bad you are at it very quickly. And then it's like teaching you this is, you got it wrong, this is how you get it right. So yeah, I think any of the data camp courses are really good. It is a bit expensive, but I think it's kind of worth it for me anyway, because that's how I learn.
Yeah. Was it strange for you coming out of something where you really had a lot of pressure to do a good job and do the right thing every time to coming into something where you were really messing up? Like all of us started in data and we did a terrible job. So was
Yeah,
that a weird shift for you?
I think it's like in some ways it was kind of like the opposite, because like in poker I was like used to losing essentially. Like if you're good at the game, you still lose all the time. So I'm just kind of used to like playing poker, losing, and that just being normal, because you only need to win a certain percentage of the time for it to be okay. And then in trading, it was kind of the same thing. Like you're not expected to make money all the time. You just need to make enough on the good days. So like whenever I went to data, I found a lot that like there was quite a lot of scrutiny on like if there actually is a right answer, you need to be able to get to it. Whereas like I was always working in like situations where everything was so uncertain that I was just used to uncertainty. But now I feel like if there's like analysis that I do, like there are a lot of the time there actually just is a right answer. So I guess it's just more obvious when I'm wrong, which
Yeah.
isn't so good.
Yeah. So this is something I've been really curious about when now we're getting here that with the interviewing. I have a lot of experience with the American job market and listening to other people searching in it. But um, yeah, I guess we'll start with just like what was job searching like for you when you started looking for data jobs?
I think like whenever I started looking, it was like around the time of like the start of the pandemic. So it was like a really bad time to start looking. So there wasn't really that many opportunities. And I think that, yeah, I think that like I kind of tried to just use the online sort of networking thing from the start, because at that point in time, the world was sort of going into lockdown. So the only way to kind of communicate with people anyway was online. So I guess I felt like if I'm going to be in my house and can't really leave my house, then talking to people online is like the only way I'm going to be able to talk to them. And then that sort of just became my process after that. So I don't actually know like if things had just been normal or if it had been a year before, I don't know if I would have approached it in the same way. So it's kind of interesting actually.
Yeah. So were you really from the start relying on networking to try and get you a job, or were you also doing the cold applications thing?
Yeah, I was like, I guess it's like when people think about networking, they think about like someone just giving them a job. But I think that like I kind of use networking in like a slightly different way, where I'm not really asking anyone for anything. I guess I'm just trying to learn from them, but I'm trying to learn from as many people as possible and try to take like little bits of information. So one thing I realized quite quickly with talking to recruiters. So for example, I would apply for loads of jobs and not hear anything back. And I'd be like thinking, why didn't that work? But it's the same thing I just talked about with like poker or like trading or data. It's like, why am I wrong? And if you can get as many opinions as possible about why you're wrong, then you can try to think about how do you make it right. So whenever I applied for jobs, if anyone rang me, I would just be like trying to harvest as much information out of them as possible. Like why did you ring me? Like, what did you look at on my like resume or CV that made you think like I need to call this person? And which part of it were you looking at and you were like, oh, maybe they're not right for the job? So I was trying to think like I was trying to like learn as much as possible about how people were like viewing me or like viewing my application, because I realized like a lot of the people started saying the same thing. They said like, oh, I noticed you had like SQL experience, or I noticed that you had like you'd done a course in Python or something like that. So then what I did was basically think, right, okay, next time I apply for jobs, I'm going to put that right at the top, because the last two people who rang me, they said that they liked that. So then I just put it to the top, and then all of a sudden the phone started ringing more. And then I
Hmm.
would ask them the same thing. I'd be like, why did you call? Like, what makes you think I'd be good for the role? And they're like, oh
Hmm.
yeah, I thought that you had some good commercial experience. And then like the next time it was like, boom, like right at the top, I've got loads of commercial experience. So it's like kind of like crowdsourcing. It's like you're just like constantly on the search for feedback. And I guess I wasn't really thinking about it like I need to get a job. I was thinking about it in the way of like I need to learn when my resume is wrong as quickly as possible and make it better and better and better. And then every time I got a phone call from a recruiter, sometimes like my first few phone calls were like terrible. They went so badly. Like they'd ask me questions and I just wouldn't have a clue what to say. And like I just wasn't getting anything from the call and they weren't really getting anything out of me. So I kind of did the same thing. I started thinking like which calls went best, which calls were the worst, and then tried to like get to a situation where the conversation was like following the similar path. So again, it's just like kind of breaking it down into its parts and trying to just improve your performance at each bit. And then you kind of go from like bad resume to good resume, bad at phone calls to good at phone calls. And then you get to job interviews and it's like bad at job interviews to good at job interviews. And it's like, that's how I use networking, I guess. It's like to try to get as much strategy out of it as possible. And then just constantly improve your performance. And it's like, that's, I guess, how I use networking the most. It's like to get that feedback from people.
Yeah. So how did people respond when you asked them what on my resume made you call me? What didn't you like? Were they open to those conversations?
Yeah, because it's like kind of if you can find a way of saying these things without making it sound as like strategic as I just kind of did. But like if someone rings you and said like, you know, I think you're great for this job, like it's not that ridiculous to be like, oh, okay, like what made you think that? Or, you know, kind of trying to steer the conversation in a way where they say why. And I think if you're kind of like polite about stuff, people will generally help. Or you could just be completely honest and say, listen, I'm not actually getting that many calls and I really appreciate that you called. So I was just wondering if there's anything you specifically liked about the CV or specifically that you didn't really like. And people are actually, people want to help. People like helping people. But I think that like a lot of people just don't ask for help. So I think, yeah, people are generally happy to help. Sometimes when you realize that you're not going to get a job, I realized that was when I was getting a lot of really useful information because people were quite like, if a recruiter calls you and says like, I think you'd be really good for this job, and then after a few minutes they realize like, okay, this person's not good for this job, they're like, okay, well, I'll probably never speak to this person again. So what I was kind of saying to them was like, you know, what other jobs have you got in the market? Or you know, like have you been getting many jobs in this sector? Or, you know, oh, out of interest, like what are the kind of salaries like at the minute for a job like that? And because they're kind of thinking this person's not going to be in the process, they're kind of like their guards down, like they're just being friendly now. So they'll be like, oh yeah, this job they were offering between 40 and 50K, and the market at the minute is really bad. Like there's not really that many jobs, but there's actually jobs over in this sector or that sector. But like they're just going to hang up and you're not really part of that process. But then the next time you go to a job interview and someone says, you know, what should your salary be? You can say, well, I've been asking all these recruiters about what the market's like at the minute, and they told me this, and they said that, you know, there's a really similar job, which is like 40 or 50K. And then that person who's not asked you that, you've like provided evidence. Like you've not just said, well, I think I should be getting paid this much. You've basically just used all your kind of networking to say, well, I have like loads of contacts and they all say this, but really it's just asking the questions, right?
Yeah, that's like a Uno +4 on them when they ask you what you think your salary should be. That's very like bold. Like it's a very analytical way to approach it, but I also feel like if I tried that, I like my heart would be just out of my chest. Did it make you nervous?
Well, like it's part of like whenever they call you about a job, like if they don't think you're right for it, they'll still tell you what the salary is.
Hmm.
But I think
Yeah.
a lot of people think, this right now is not going to benefit me, so I have no interest in talking anymore. Whereas like if you just kind of like treat people like people and just have normal conversations, and you kind of think, well, maybe I won't get this job, but maybe we'll work together in the future, or maybe they'll remember me in the future. It's like, I think just like people are just happy to give you the information. Like, it's not really like I was asking for anything that wasn't allowed. Like, whenever a recruiter calls you, like they can tell you the salary. I think that I think a lot of people kind of just think, I'm not getting directly helped right now, so this person is no good to me, or something like that. Like, a really good example is like when people think about networking, they just message someone and say, hey, you have a good job, can I have a job? And it's like that's never going to work. But it's because they've kind of missed the picture. They think like you should just ask directly for what you want, when it's not really what you should be doing. Like, you should just be trying to like build friends and like people that you trust, and kind of like, yeah, just have like friends in the industry, and then you just kind of learn more about the industry that way. It's I guess it like sounds a lot more strategic when I kind of say it all at once, but there's a lot of friendly conversations in the meantime, and there's a lot of like just normal chit chat. But I think like looking back, I guess this is the stuff that was like the most helpful. But it wasn't like someone calls me and I have to try and get their information. It was more just like, you know, just kind of having friends and just chatting to people, really.
Yeah. So were you sending out any networking? This was all like incoming networking that you've talked about. And you said, don't just message people and say, hey, can I have a job? Because that doesn't work most of the time. But were you sending out any networking?
I think that I was connecting with people on like LinkedIn and things like that, but I think the key thing is to just like kind of like just be looking to like build relationships with people, just to build them, without thinking about what it is you actually want, because it's all about like the kind of like the long run. Like, it's not really about any one person or any one phone call, one email, or anything like that. So like, I wasn't really reaching out to people and asking them for anything. It was more just like, it's kind of like thinking in the long term. Like, if I know everybody who works in the data industry and I know loads of recruiters, it's going to be easier to get a job. So, but it's also going to be more fun, because I'm going to be able to meet loads of friends. I'm going to have loads of people to like discuss things with. And it's like, I think a lot of people are just like, they're essentially just trying to reach out to people so that they can get something. And if you just reach out to somebody and you ask for something, they're just not going to give it to you. It just doesn't work like that. You just have to kind of build friends in a most like normal way, and then that's kind of when you mutually benefit from being friends, I guess.
Yeah. You did say earlier that you were reaching out to people, asking about like, what do you do at your job? Do you like it? And you were kind of trying to reverse before you got to the job search. So when you went about those kinds of conversations where you're reaching out just to ask them about their jobs, was there any specific way that you went about approaching that?
Yeah, for sure. Like, so basically at that point, I was just trying to understand the market. I was trying to understand like what jobs are even available, and like what do people do all day in their jobs. So I guess like I was just kind of reaching out and saying like, you know, hey, I've got like this experience, and I noticed that we had all these things in common. Like, my background is in this, this, and this, and I see that you've got a really similar background. I'd love to ask you some questions sometime about the industry, or like what you find interesting about your job, or I'm thinking of applying to a similar job than you, and I was wondering if you had any advice, and could I, you know, what I kind of realized from that is that people are actually happy to help as long as they feel like you're genuine. And all I was really trying to do was think like, if I know people who are data analysts and I know people who work in a certain sector, then it's just going to be so helpful to pick their brain. And then people were happy to share their stories. And then, yeah, that was kind of how I reached out to people, and people were just incredible. Like, they taught me so much about, you know, what tools I needed and how the interview processes worked. And yeah, like, people were really, really helpful.
So this job that you have now, was this your first data job, or did you have another data job before that?
No, I basically, once I started applying for jobs, I got like a job at a bank as like a strategy analyst. and that was pretty much just like all SQL. Pretty much we were just the data team, and we were just getting like requests every day to pull the analysis on this, that, and the other, and that was really interesting. It was just like pretty much just writing SQL code like all day, every day. So that was kind of like my first data job. But I think that was kind of like the perfect job to kind of go into after that. But before that, I obviously had experience doing tons of analysis and stuff anyway. It was just not really using SQL.
Yeah. So how did you end up getting that job at the bank?
I think that like I basically just applied for that job, and didn't hear back. I think I didn't get the job, but then they basically called me and said, we're not gonna like, I think they basically said that like, we're calling you because you're not like guaranteed to get the job, but like we liked that you have the commercial stuff, and we like that you have the analytical stuff, and would you be willing to kind of come in at a slightly more junior level, and we'll just teach you all the data side of it. And instead of hiring like 1 or 2 people, they ended up hiring 3 people. But I think that it was like maybe like lower salaries, and they were sort of hoping that like, that if one of us was good at one thing and the other one was good at another thing, we would just balance each other out. So I just got loads and loads of training. So yeah, I think it was like not like, I think just like having good relationships with people. So like recruiters and things like that, they were kind of like kind of rooting for you a little bit, because like they know you. So like whenever they're talking to somebody, they're kind of negotiating. So like it's kind of like a recruiter kind of like negotiated, like that if it's not the perfect plan A, maybe it could be like a plan B, or maybe it could be like a plan C. So I think that was like really helpful as well. So it wasn't exactly as I imagined.
Did you have any hesitations? I've seen some people say in your first data job, don't take a low paying job because like you're worth more than that and stuff. I have a lot of feelings on that, but how did you feel about, did you
Yeah,
have any
like
hesitations?
I didn't, but like I know that this is like a topic that people find very like they're very passionate about. They're like, I would never work for free, or like we should stop companies trying to like pay people too little and stuff like that. But like whatever about all that, I just felt like I just needed to get this SQL stuff and this data stuff on my CV or my resume like as quickly as possible, because again, it's just like the long game. Like if I can get that on the next time I apply for a job, either internally or externally, they're going to see that I have it. And if I don't, in 6 months' time, I'm just going to be back in the same position where like companies are going to want it. So I think that people should just push to get like projects and get like experience, like just whatever they can get, just get it on the resume as quickly as possible. And if you have to do personal projects in order to get that, then I think that like is a good start. But I think that like having those gaps and not having those skills, it's just really, really hard to get the phone calls from companies.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you told me, and I ended up doing that, and it did work for me. So, how
Well,
long were you at
yeah,
that job at the bank?
you were doing a lot back then. I remember like
A lot.
I definitely thought that your kind of approach to it was like super interesting, because I remember that time you were on TikTok and you were
Yep.
sharing your journey. So it was yeah, I thought
I
that
was
was like
very
really
everything.
interesting.
But what you said about just needing to get it on the resume, like I just knew that I kept hearing, they kept saying, do you have SQL experience? Do you have X experience? And I just needed a way to be able to say yes to that question.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really care what that was. Plus, like if you like, some people are like, oh well, if you can get like, don't take a 60K job. I would only take a minimum of 80K. And I'm like, if you spend an extra 2 months job searching because
Yeah.
you wanted that 80K, how that's 2 months of not getting paid. And
Mm-hmm.
then like when that's 2 months later, if you wanted to take a step from that job, if you don't end up liking it. So how long did you stay at that bank?
I was there for maybe like it was definitely less than a year, probably between like 6 months and a year. And then I ended up moving on to a different job. It was just one of those things where a much better opportunity came along, and like I was also like working very far away from where I lived, and it was all remote at the time, so that was kind of fine. But then whenever they started asking people to come back from work and things like that, they wanted me to like be a lot closer, and it just made a lot more sense to kind of move on to a different role. So yeah, now I kind of work at a football club, and I've been got like a job as a business intelligence like developer. So it's using like Power BI and using like dashboards and things like that, and using like SQL and kind of working with databases and different stuff like that. So yeah, I think it's like it's all just part of the journey, and I think that like it's just I think you just essentially want to be able to demonstrate your value as quickly as possible. So like I think it's one thing to do like a degree, but if you've got a degree, that's like a really good first step. But like a business is going to think like, we want you to do these 10 tasks, and if you can do them, we'll hire you. And again, I just think that it's all just about like being able to prove that you can do those things as quickly as possible. And doing an online course is great, but if you can kind of say like, I did this project and it is literally what you want from a job, like it's what I would be doing on my day to day, or you can get work experience, it just makes you so much more hireable so quickly. So like if you can get that so quickly, then that's going to make all the difference.
Yeah, so I've been talking a lot about critical thinking skills lately. Do you feel like your first job required less critical thinking skills than the one that you've got now? Like, was the first one more just like, these are the reports that we want, and now they want you to kind of be a little bit more solving business problems?
I think it's tough to know, because like I think that whenever I first got my first job in like a trading department, like you're working with markets and there is no right answer. So a lot of the time you're just trying to make good decisions, but there's like loads of thinking involved, but it's like there's no real right answer. So it's working with like such uncertainty. It's kind of difficult to explain. Like it's just a lot of what goes into those types of jobs is just that your logic can be proved to be right. So people ask you like not what actually happened in the result. Like they talk about like not being results oriented. Like if you make money, that doesn't actually mean you made the right decision. It's actually about like, would you make money in the long run? Because so much of short-term stuff just comes down to luck. So there was a lot of like in my first jobs, especially with like poker and with trading, a lot of it is just like people checking like your thought process. And then if they think, right, you've made all the right assumptions, then you kind of go with that as a strategy. Whereas some other jobs are like a lot more like there actually is a right answer. And like if the numbers don't add up, they're like, well, you've done something wrong here because the math isn't making sense. So yeah, like I think it's kind of tough one, because like the first jobs were so uncertain, I guess.
Yeah. Did you do, this is a step back, but did you do any portfolio projects before getting your first data job? Or was it all just kind of, I kind of have an analytics experience here and
Yeah, like
it's confidential?
I think that like if I was kind of starting again, I would definitely do like all the portfolio stuff very early. But I think that because I kind of had a few years experience in an office, I was able to try to find time to learn a new skill at work. So if it was like Power BI, there would be someone in the office who had access to Power BI, and then I would try to be like, can I get access to that, or can I shadow them? Can I learn from them? And again, it was just like try to find a way within the office for them to let, like, even for a couple of hours, to just do any sort of project where I had that on my resume, and then I could learn those skills. So I think because I was already working, I was just trying to learn new skills within the office environment. And then I was doing a lot of the certificates to try to learn SQL and things like that. But I didn't really get around to building like proper portfolios because we had access to SQL in the office. So I was just kind of like doing basic stuff at work. But I think if I was to start again now, and if like people didn't have access to an office, I think like a lot of the way that things are kind of going, and I know that it's like been the case for you and it's been the case for like lots of other people, but like sharing your work online is like, it's just huge, because if someone doesn't know you and they go to like your LinkedIn profile or they see what your interests are, if you've got like, you know, on your LinkedIn profile, you're saying like, I'm really interested in marketing, you know, I really want to work in sports, or I really want to work in this. And then that person says like, oh, okay, like, you know, how much do they know about it? Like, what's their resume? What's their skills? If you've got like a portfolio, which is like, here are the top 6 things that a business wants from someone who works in marketing, and you've got like a project using SQL and Power BI and like, you know, R and all these different things, and you've got like 5 or 6 different tools demonstrating your insights in like within one topic of, say, like marketing. If you like have that and you post even once a week about, here's some insights I got from a marketing project, here's some thoughts I have on the marketing industry, and you're always connecting with people who also talk about marketing, and you're like getting in the conversation, it's just a matter of time before someone reaches out and says, hey, you're awesome at marketing and you clearly have all the skills. And even if you haven't worked in marketing before, you've just like fully demonstrated like exactly what it would be like if you worked there. So like if I was doing it again and I was starting from scratch, like that's definitely what I would be doing. And I think that people aren't actually, I think people are moving towards that direction, but I think it's going to be like, I think it's going to be a lot like that in the future. Like I think it's going to be a lot of people sharing their insights and sharing their work and getting jobs that way.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree with that. Would you advocate for people like making posts on LinkedIn to talk about what they're learning or their projects or whatever?
Yeah, like I think so. Like I think that just having friends in the industry is huge. Like if you think about going for a job, people think about like, you know, they're really stressed, they're really confused, and a lot of that just comes back to like they're just doing it all by themselves. They're just figuring it all out by themselves. Whereas if you just have other people on the journey, then there's going to be people who are like a couple of years ahead of you that you can learn from, and then there's going to be a couple people who are like a couple of years behind you, and they're going to be able to learn from you. And then the whole process is just going to not feel like you're alone. It's going to feel like you're part of something. And even if nobody kind of reaches out and just says like, you know, here's a job, they will reach out and maybe offer you encouragement, or like, you know, say, you know, you should look at this or you should look at that, or just give you ideas. And yeah, I would definitely suggest like being a part of the community for whatever it is that you're interested in.
Yeah, I have had a couple people ask me to talk about this. They're from the UK, and they said that in the UK, and there's like a more like a decorum, and so they were curious about your thoughts on like it being awkward to like kind of share publicly on social media, like, hey, here's what I'm doing. When I told my boyfriend I had a TikTok, he's British. I can't even tell you the look on his face. He like took a while to get over it. And like I'll sometimes like be like, hey, this post got 100,000 views today, and he'll like roll his eyes. He's like TikTok, which LinkedIn obviously isn't TikTok, but
Yeah,
is
like
there a barrier there for you?
I think that like a lot of people just don't know what they're trying to achieve. So if you go on if you go on Twitter or you go on LinkedIn, there are some people who have, you know, like hundreds of thousands of followers, and they post, you know, 2 or 3 times a day, and they've got a lot going on. And to someone like that's just like really daunting. It's like they're like, well, I don't want to do that. Like that seems like a lot of work, and that's like that maybe just puts them off entirely. So they're like, I can't post 3 times a day. I can't post even 1 time a day. So we'll just never post at all. And like, I don't think that's, I, I think that like, there's like a lower tier of like, what if you just post like to a small group of friends and you don't try to build like a massive network. You just try to build a very small group of friends who you find interesting, and then you kind of go on and you chat to and you learn from each other. And the aim of it is really to just share stuff that you find interesting with close friends. Like, I think that I would definitely advise people to do that. But I think that a lot of people kind of think the options are like, don't post at all or post all the time. And it doesn't have to be either of those things. It can just be, I learned something today and here's what I learned and I thought it was interesting, or here's something funny, or here's something that I wish I knew 2 weeks ago, or here's something that somebody asked me and this is what I said, trying to be helpful essentially.
Yeah, you and I were talking about that in a message earlier. Like recently, you said you've been really into storytelling. I just got getting back my treadmill. This book, Storytelling with You.
Oh yeah.
And so it's so funny that you said you're really into storytelling. I think you made a post about it this morning, right? About storytelling.
Yeah, like it's funny because like I think my point was basically that like people ask me, how do I get better at job interviews? Or they ask me like, how do I fix my LinkedIn profile? They ask me, how do I fix my resume? How do I get a job? And what I was sort of saying was that like all those questions are basically just the same answer. You just need to work out what it is you want and then what it is somebody else wants, and then just join the dots by saying, here's what I can do, here's what you're looking for, and then being able to kind of like to make them kind of meet in the middle. And that's kind of what storytelling is. Like it's like if a business says we need someone who can do these 5 things, your story is essentially like, here's the evidence that I can do these 5 things. And it doesn't really matter if it's on your LinkedIn profile and you're posting your work, or if it's in a job interview and you're telling the story about the 5 things individually, or if you just get a call from a recruiter or you get a call from a friend and they say, hey, what are you up to? It's the same story. And if you get better at telling it in a really like compelling way and a really concise way that other people can remember and then tell to other people, then that's how you start getting recommended to things. That's how you start getting more opportunities. But I think a lot of people just focus on like learning as much as possible, and they then get asked like a question in a job interview, or they get asked a question by a recruiter or something, and they just don't really know how to explain the benefits of like themselves. But it's that storytelling. And I think that's another reason why LinkedIn is good, because like if you get used to kind of writing and you get used to sharing your ideas, it just becomes easier to do it in any other situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And like what you were saying about how sharing things to like a small group of people, like here's something I wish I knew 2 weeks ago, or here's what I'm learning, like that really is storytelling. And it feels more natural. Like if we as humans, there's some really interesting neuroscience behind it. I've looked into it before, but basically we as humans are really wired for storytelling and connection. We have this kind of open system, and we're kind of wired for being connected with other people through stories and body language and stuff too. And so um, I found that when I started sharing my story on TikTok and then on LinkedIn, I mean, I can maybe share, like now that I have established a following, people will definitely ask, hey, can you do like a portfolio post, or I'll do my Tableau tip Tuesday or whatever. But the things that resonate the most with people are always just like a story. Like my first time I got a call from a recruiter, I was just finishing up a really hard day. I had got yelled at by this patient with dementia who I actually really loved. But when you have dementia, you sometimes are not the nicest at the end of the day. And I walked out of there and I got this phone call and I picked it up, and I was still in like occupational therapy mode. And this recruiter is like talking to me and they're like, hey, just calling, saw your application. They said the name of their company really fast. I was trying to think, I had applied to so many jobs and I was trying to find the relevant job description in my brain and stuff. Totally botched it. Totally
Yeah.
failed that interview. I did not hear back from them. But people really resonated with that story because it was a story, it was a human story, which is really kind of to the point that you're saying.
Yeah. And like I think one of the reasons why your TikTok was so popular so quickly was because people could relate to you. But also I remember like we were talking before and I asked you about TikTok and you said that like um like you showed me some of the videos that you had in like your account or whatever, and I was like watching some of the videos, but like you were just like in your car, or you were like walking, or you were like peeling potatoes in the kitchen or something, but also like chatting, and people were just like really resonating with like you're just like being a normal person. So it's like really authentic. Like a lot of people put like thousands and thousands of pounds into like, or dollars, getting into like, you know, the best lights and the best editing and making things look amazing all the time with like, you know, 15 hours of editing to get down to like the perfect minute of content. Whereas like on TikTok, people were just like, you know, just taking their camera out and just talking into the camera and then just putting it away again. And like it was so much more real and so much more like a part of your actual life, that I think that people really get to know you as a person, who you actually are. And that's actually really interesting, because whenever that recruiter called you and you said that it didn't go well, they didn't know you at all, because, you know, they don't know who you are. So you've got like 10 seconds to convince them that you're this like perfect person for this job. Whereas like if you're like posting on TikTok, you're posting on LinkedIn, you're doing webinars, people are like, people are getting to know the real you so quickly that like if actually something like that does happen, they'll just give you the benefit of the doubt, because they'll be like, oh, I actually know that person. They're not trying to judge you in 10 seconds, they're trying to judge you over 5 years. And that's like just so much better. Like that's where recommendations come from, that's where referrals come from, that's where um years of like success come from, basically, is because people are like one of the messages that, like whenever I started doing like posting stuff on initially my blog, but then on LinkedIn, someone messaged me and said like, they said, I really think you'd like this documentary, because like this person thinks in a very similar way to you. And I was like, I don't even know who this person, like I don't know who you are, but you've just said like I'm going to like this because you know how I think. And I was just like, that's so interesting that like that you like, you know what I mean, like you actually know how someone thinks. Like I was like, that's so
Yeah.
personal, that's crazy.
Yeah, and I think that can come through too on the, you know, with the way that you post on LinkedIn, and that's what I try and tell people. A lot of times people get stuck on, well, I don't have the perfect thing to say on LinkedIn, or my project isn't perfect, or even like in a related vein, people will say specifically, what course do I need to become a data analyst, or specifically, what's a portfolio project I can do to impress people. Um, and I have like the reason that people like you and me kind of more generally will say I liked DataCamp or I liked Maven is because it's not about any like specific thing, right? Like we're not trying to get jobs as senior analytics leaders that need to have all this experience. We're just trying to get entry level jobs. And so it's more about the learning and the story and the doing it than it is about producing any one amazing thing. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, like it's funny, like people definitely think that um that people are paying more attention to them than they are. So like if you're thinking about your first like LinkedIn post or something, someone's going to read it and they're going to think about it for 20 seconds, and then they'll maybe comment on it, or they'll maybe just move on. And it's not going to like, there's not going to be any judgment, like really they're already getting distracted by a cat video or something like that. Like it's, I think people put a lot of pressure on themselves to be this perfect person, and it's like no one's going to remember what you write. Like they'll remember how your last like 10 posts made them feel, or they'll remember like if you got some like very emotional reaction out of them. But people don't remember everything people say all the time. They just remember, they remember it very vaguely. So I think people put a lot of pressure on themselves to do this perfect thing, but no one's paying attention. Like they're like, I can't even remember what, like you mentioned that post I did earlier, like I'd already sort of forgotten that I did that. It's
I do the same thing.
yeah, it just happens.
Yeah, and I think on a similar note to networking, something you said reminded me that I saw a post from like an analytics manager, or I think it was actually a comment in a thread, and they said that if they or one of their colleagues posts something like really good, and then they see in the comments insightful comments from people or like really insightful questions, they will go back and they will look at that person's profile. Like if they're hiring, they'll go back and look at that person's profile, especially if they have the open to work banner, because what they saw from that person's comment show that they have the ability to kind of think the way that they're looking for. And I think that's like another thing that fits into the vein of networking that I've said it, I think, the idea of networking is really scary, but like commenting an insightful comment is not, there's no pressure there, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's like just being a part of the conversation, and like if it's natural to, if you've got some thoughts, then people want to hear them. But I think that what you said is really important as well. Like they will go to your profile and they'll look, but it's like, I do think it's important that people like that. It's back to that storytelling. It's like if someone goes to your profile, like what do you want them to think? If you want a job in marketing, then you should probably say something about wanting a job in marketing, and you should probably have some marketing references. You should have some data references. You should have some the tools that you're learning, maybe some evidence of why you'd be good at marketing. And then if that perfect person who could potentially hire you, or someone who's just kind of also interested in marketing, if they go to your profile and it's got like 15 different things in all different directions and doesn't really mention any of that, then it's kind of like a lost opportunity for them to ever contact you. So like some people will say to me, they'll reach out to me and say like, I'm really looking for a job. I'll just say marketing again, but I'm really looking for a job in marketing as a data analyst. Could you help me with my profile page? And then I'll go to their profile page and it'll be like risk trader, and like it'll say like love football, and their post will be about like something about a completely other topic. And I was like you haven't written any of the stuff that you've said to me. Like just take what you just said to me and just put it on your page, because like that resonated with me when you said it, but then you haven't actually said it. And then they're like, oh yeah, that does make sense. Like I haven't mentioned any of it. Or they've mentioned stuff that they did like 5 years ago that they don't want people to talk about, but people are only going to talk about what they see, you know what I mean? So it's like, again, it's just like telling your story in the way that you want people to hear it.
Yeah, something else that I find is common is people will say, I'm interested in getting into tech. I'm interested in maybe analytics, maybe project management, they'll list kind of all those things in a similar vein. And they'll say that, in maybe even their headline, but at least in their profile. And my response usually to that is like, I'm super happy for you that you're trying to make a change in your life. Like it's clear that you're trying to make a change. That's great. But I don't have any good advice for you, because when I decided to get into analytics, it was clear to me that that's what I was enjoying doing. I was waking up every day and I wanted to write SQL. I wanted to learn Tableau. I wanted to learn Python. Did I want to become a project manager? No. Did I consider it at the beginning of the tech journey when I was still looking at all the tech jobs? Yeah, definitely. I looked at all of them. And then I decided on analytics. And so I think there's nothing wrong with wanting to get into tech just because you want to get into tech and you want to have a remote job. But I guess I don't really have great advice for people who are not like sold that I want to be an analyst. And if you are sold that you want to be an analyst and your profile doesn't reflect that, like you just said, then you got to make sure, and your resume too. That's the other thing. Have you ever looked at anyone's resumes?
Yeah. I think like a lot of it comes down to just being specific. So if someone doesn't know what they want, it's like really hard to help them get it. So I think like that specific person or that person probably just needs to do more kind of like research to see which one of those things they actually want. And then if they're reaching out to someone to say, how do I get better at project management, or how do I get better at data, they'll get better answers, because they're going to get more specific answers. Whereas you would have had to give them like advice on how to do 3 separate careers. So that just would have been impossible to do.
Yeah. So you said that you talked to a lot of people before you got into. Go ahead. Would you have something else on that?
Oh no, sorry. I just remembered your question about resumes. Yeah, people don't do that on their resumes. If they basically like the world now with like online, and with how many people apply for jobs, and with how many people are on LinkedIn or the internet in general, what essentially it is that like everyone is fighting for attention in some way. So if you apply for a job, maybe 200 other people have applied. So it's like, it's all just about like being able to tell like a very concise story that makes sense as quickly as possible, so that when someone just glances and gives you like 5 seconds of their attention, that your story just jumps off the page. And that's essentially what a good resume is like, if you can tell a story in like 4 or 5 lines about who you are, what you want, why you should be good at it, and why you want it, that person will go either that's not for me, or oh, that is what we're looking for. But if someone gets confused and they don't know what you want, they'll just move on to the next one, because there's, and it's the same thing with like LinkedIn. If like someone puts a post and if someone very clearly says this is what this is and why you should read it, people generally read it. But if people don't know what it is, they get confused and then they just skip it. So it's just about being super clear.
Yeah. Yeah. What I was saying, you said when you were trying to get into the industry, you asked a lot of people about what their jobs were like in data. What do they actually do with their jobs? So now that you've had 2 jobs in data, has it matched up with what you expected and what you wanted?
Yeah, for sure. Like I think like I just kind of want, like, I wanted a job where I could just keep thinking in a similar way to where the way I was thinking before. So like quite analytical and like quite strategic, and sort of thinking, if it's, say it's like e-commerce or something like that, like, how can we get more sales in this part of the world? Or if it's like social media or it's marketing, whatever it is that I'm working on at the time, it's like using tools like SQL, using Power BI to kind of like get to those decisions. But that's pretty much exactly what I thought it would be. And I think the reason why it turned out to be that way is because I sort of talked to so many people. And I think that's the interesting thing. That's probably the most interesting thing about data and tech in general, is that if you look at someone who works for like any company in the world, they're pretty much using the same tools and they're kind of using the same techniques. Like that's why I think it's so interesting. And like, if you can essentially learn like kind of some core skills, like, like SQL and Python and Power BI or Tableau, and like you can kind of work in like fashion, or you could work for like, NASA, or you could work for whoever, Amazon, or, a football club, or Dell. It doesn't really matter. They're all going to be using similar tools, and they're all going to be using similar techniques. I think that's why it's so interesting to me. It's because like if you kind of get an idea of what a data analyst is, they're kind of the same, very similar roles, no matter what industry you're in. Yeah, so like that was essentially what I did was I basically just packaged all of that into an ebook, which is like just like 50 or 60 interviews with different people working in data. And I just asked them all, what's your job? How did you get your job? How can someone get a job like that? Which tools do you use? Do you have any career advice? How do you get started networking? Things like that. And then I just packaged all of the interviews into an ebook. And it was quite interesting, really, because I just realized that all these stories were completely different, but they were also just completely the same. And I think that's why it's like the data industry is so interesting.
Yeah, I have read your book, and it is really interesting to kind of see all these different stories. For people who haven't read Michael's book, you can kind of there's people at different levels, right? So like when you said you're re-releasing it, when are you going to be re-releasing it? Do you know?
Yeah, like hopefully in the next couple of days.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So the original, which is currently out, is interviewed with me, basically, I think probably before I got my job, right? I don't know if we ended up updating it at all. The updated is my current updated story. But you got people who, like me, who are searching all the way through like CEOs, right? And like pretty experienced people.
Yeah. So it's like, basically what I didn't want to do was give out like any blanket advice about like, if you want to do this, you need to do these 5 things because say they work for me or something. So what I basically did was just ask loads of different people, and then they shared their stories, and then I just let other people sort of do their takeaways from it, so that people can kind of see like, no one is saying you should do these specific things, but if you learn enough about what worked for other people, then you can kind of take away your own inferences. But yeah, it has
Yeah,
like all the
that's why I
different
started these coffee
ranges.
chats. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry. Did you want to finish that sentence?
No, I was just gonna say, and that's why they work so well. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I started these coffee chats, because I just found that, you know, like you're a really good example. I had no experience in analytics, anything, and I had to start from zero and teach myself the tools and everything, and then get in. And I really heavily leveraged a portfolio and showing my skills that way. But you didn't, because you were able to say, hey, I had an analytics experience, I used Power BI. And so that you were able to leverage a totally different set of experience and skills. And so that's why when I do try and give advice to people, I try and give it carefully. I just say like, this is what I did, and this is what I'm seeing working for other people. But like, I know people who don't have a portfolio or an analytics experience and they got a job in it. I know people who have both of those things and they're struggling to get a job. You know, like it's just every story seems to be so different.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of people are actually doing the right thing, but it just hasn't worked out for them yet, or um, maybe they just got unlucky and they didn't get a job that just wasn't the right time for them. But maybe they'll get it next month. But that person isn't going to be like a success in a month, and they're not a success now. But like what happens is that people kind of find people who like very one specific person and one with one specific job and think, right, they must have done everything right. But it's just not the case. Like they might have got lucky along the way, or like they might have just known the right people, or like they might have they might have just worked really hard. But like if you followed their exact path, it probably wouldn't work because you're not them. But like I think if you understand like the principles of what they tried to do, and like understand in general what they did, and you kind of learn that about a lot of people, then you can kind of put it all together and try different things. So I think like, yeah, it's, you never want to be trying to be like one exact other person, but you want to try and learn from as many people as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it is 1:32 p.m. my time. We've been talking for an hour. I saw at 12:58. I like panicked because I was like, what? We only have 2 minutes left, because I normally do it on the hour.
Okay.
These things always go so quickly. Thank you so much for this. Was definitely a very different. Last time I talked to Lauren, and we talked a lot about like our feelings. We talked about like how scary it is to put your portfolio out there and like doing it scared. And you're like very concretely like, these are the questions you could ask recruiters to try and get feedback on your resume and stuff. And it's so funny how, like I said, everyone's story is different. You know, like these are all such different conversations.
I think so. Like I think that's the whole reason why you talk to lots of people, because you get lots of different perspectives, you get lots of different thoughts. I think because I've been putting stuff on LinkedIn, or I've been like, people kind of ask me these questions the same way they ask you these questions. Like they reach out and they say, I've got this really specific question. Can you give me a really specific answer? So I think a lot of the stuff kind of just comes quite quickly, because I do try to help when I can and just kind of like share these ideas. But yeah, I guess they're something that I think about.
Yeah, we think about it a lot. Well, for anybody who wants to hear more of Michael's ideas, he's got a LinkedIn, he's got a book. I will put his LinkedIn link and book in the bio of this event on YouTube. I don't know if I can do it on LinkedIn or not, but just search his name. He's on there. So thanks for coming. I'm
Yeah,
going to
thanks
end
so
the
much for having
podcast,
me.
and I think
Thanks so
we'll
much.
stay on. So bye, guys.